Alright guys, so we're trying something different today. We're trying a standalone deck tech. The main reason for this is that, well, the main reason I love this format is the brewing, right? I like looking at different decks, I like seeing what's possible when you're working within the scope of the budget. And I'm really excited about the bracket, but it's taking me a little bit longer to get the videos out than I want. And there's so many decks that I want to talk about and share with anyone who's watching that I just want to kind of fast track it a little bit and do these short deck techs in addition to the Instagram posts, just to share with you guys what I'm working on or what people that I know are working on that we think are really cool. And for this first one, I think this deck's very cool. Right now we're looking at Esper Miracles, again in $30 budget vintage. Now there's a couple things right now that are worth talking about, and the first one is that in vintage we have the restricted list, and I'll admit I have to check the banned and restricted list pretty often to remember what's restricted. Like, do I get one gush or do I get four gushes? I don't know, better check. How many ponders do I get? I don't know. But anyway, the reason that matters is because we only get one Brainstorm. And for those of you who are familiar with Blue-White Miracles in Legacy, deck plays 4 Brainstorms because Brainstorm's very important. So just dialing back, for those of you who aren't familiar with this deck, we want to use a Brainstorm effect to set up a Miracle Terminus, either in our draw step or on our opponent's turn, using something like an Opt or a Cling to Dust to draw on their turn, because it turns out Terminus is really good if you get to cast it for 1 pretty regularly. And that's really the reason the deck exists. You do win the game with Entreat the Angels. It's a pretty efficient card for closing things out, honestly. But you do have to be able to set up your miracles. Now, we only get the 1 Brainstorm, so we're relying on 4 copies of Brainstone. And this might be a little contentious because, quite frankly, Brainstone is not very good. Especially, I remember in Modern when Brainstone came out, people thought, maybe it's a one-of with like Urza's Saga to tutor it. But we obviously don't have Urza's Saga because of our budget. So we are just playing Brainstone at face value. This card is pretty inefficient. It's a much slower Brainstorm. But, I think this format's a little slower than Legacy, obviously. And I think we have the time. Plus, we're playing a ton of tempo-positive cards, right? Like, whatever tempo you lose putting 3 mana into a Brainstone activation, if you're using it to set up a Terminus, then you're kind of paying 4 mana total to make a board wipe happen. But you're on the installment plan. You're paying 1 and then 2 and then 1, and that's better than paying 4. And 4 mana board wipes are playable, so that's kind of the calculus I'm running to justify Brainstone. I think it's fine. I really, truly do. We are playing our 1 Brainstorm. Now, to take advantage of that, we're also playing 4 Ash Barrens as part of our mana base. The cycling lets you clear a Brainstorm. Again, for those of you not familiar with Legacy and Brainstorm in Legacy, it's really good to be able to draw 3 cards, put 2 cards you don't want back on top, and then crack a fetch land to shuffle them away. And then in that case, Brainstorm is kind of like drawing 3 cards, because you got 3 new cards to your hand, and you put extra lands or removal spells that you don't need, or something like that. We don't really get, well, we do get fetch lands, but we'll talk about that in a second. Ash Barrens is a good way to clear the Brainstorm. While we're in the mana base, 1 Castle Vantress. We can actually fit this in, which is really nice. It can set up a miracle. It's not awesome at it, and you do have to have a natural miracle on top, but we're playing a pretty high density of miracle cards, which we'll talk about next. I will say we do have 2 actual fetch lands to shuffle our Brainstorms. Floodplain. So there's a cycle of slow fetches, I think are what people call them. Notably, they enter tapped, but the land they get doesn't enter tapped. And it's getting a plains or an island, but the way we've constructed our mana base, we're using 4 Prairie Stream, 1 Sunken Hollow, and these cards both have types. So our floodplains actually let us fetch dual lands, and we're pretty heavily invested in basics. We're playing a total of 10, it looks like, which is a good amount. So our Prairie Streams are pretty generally tundras starting on turn 3 or 4, and they're fetchable tundras off of Floodplain. So that's kind of good. I think our mana is good. We're playing 1 swamp and 1 sunken hollow to fetch for, so we've got 2 fetchables, and we have 6 fetches that can get them. So it's a total of 8 black sources in our deck, but really we're just playing 1 Cling to Dust and 4 Sister Repentia, which... Alright, now it's probably a good time to talk about Sister Repentia. So I think this card is a big part of the reason I'm excited about this deck. The Warhammer 40k Commander decks that came out brought us 3 new Miracle cards, I think. One of them is $7, so we're not allowed to play it. That's Triumph of St. Catherine. Oh, actually, it's not $7. It's $14. We'll just check it out. It's a 5/5, and it kind of shuffles itself back in to be miracled again. It was $7 when I built this deck a couple weeks ago, but people are starting to play it in things like Jeskai Stoneblade in Legacy, so we're never going to see this card in our format. So goodbye, Triumph of St. Catherine. I'm really, really hoping that no one starts experimenting with Esper Miracles in Legacy, because if my Sister Repentias go up, I will kill myself on live TV. I will not do that, but I'll be very upset. So let's talk about this card. It's a 5/1, costs 5, and you can miracle it for 2. Black is on the cost, that's why we're playing black in our deck. It's Esper Miracles. But it's a 5/1, and when it dies, you gain 2 and you draw 2. I mean, that's powerful. That's a powerful card. We are a Swords to Plowshares format, so... You know, there is exile-based removal. I think that's okay, though. You still do get to gain 5 life, and most of the time, you're going to be able to miracle this for 2 mana, put it in play, and either you're just going to start getting in, hitting your opponent, and 5 is a fast clock. Like, they have to deal with this, right? They have to trade off in combat or lightning bolt it, and when they do that, you've gotten yourself a 2 mana 3/1 plus some life. I mean, that's really, really strong. So thank you to Warhammer for that. We're also playing 2 Zephyrim. This is the card I'm maybe the least sure of. It's okay. Basically, 2 mana gets you a 3/3, and Squad says that it's kind of like multi-kicker, but it's an enters the battlefield trigger. Notably, you do get blown out by a counterspell if you dump a lot of mana into it. It's not like Replicate, where it's putting multiple copies of Zephyrim on the stack. It's 1 card, or it's 1 spell on the stack. But it's fairly efficient. You get a 3/3 with Flying and Vigilance for every 2 mana you put into it. Whereas Entreat the Angels, you're getting a 4/4 for every 1 mana, but there is an upfront cost of 2. So if you're comparing them, you put 4 mana into Entreat Miracled, and you're getting 2 4/4s instead of 2 3/3s. But Zephyrum's a little bit better if you only want to put 2 mana into it, and just get a 3/3 to kind of start playing to the board a little bit while maybe holding up some interaction. I'm not sure. Zephyrum is notably about half the cost. And the reason I want to play Zephyrum is because I just want a density of miracles. Again, we're not as efficient as Legacy Miracles at setting them up, so my thought is to play more of them. And if we're playing more of them, it's a little bit easier to just naturally draw step a Sister Repentia or a Zephyrum, which I think is a fine thing to happen. I actually thought about calling this deck Esper Miracle Midrange, because it does feel like it plays more like a mid-range deck than a typical Miracles list. And on that note, I have been talking, there's a chance you could consider just being straight up blue-white Miracles. You could ditch the Zephyrum, and you could ditch the Sister Repentia, and you could try to win the game just being blue-white control with Terminus and Entreat the Angels. And that actually opens up the door to play Lurrus in your deck, which is a free 8th card in your hand, and it lets you recycle your Brainstones, which not quite as good as Mishra's Bauble, maybe, but I don't know, I'm always generally pretty interested in considering companions in this format when I can have them. So maybe there's a version that looks like that. Also, cycling back to the one of Entreat the Angels in our list, I'm okay playing one of them and being a little light on finishers, because we're playing 2 Mystic Sanctuaries. And again, this card's not legal in a ton of formats, so we get to enjoy it. And we actually get to fetch into it. Floodplain gets Mystic Sanctuary, because Floodplain enters tapped, but the land that you tutor for doesn't, because remember, Sanctuary says when it enters untapped, do this. So we are actually able to keep our Mystic Sanctuaries in the deck, either through brainstorming them back and, not using them as early mana development, or just, not drawing them. And when we get to the late game, where we would really like to have, say, a second or a third Entreat the Angels, because, we cast a little one earlier, or it got discarded out of our hand, we can buy it back to the top and have that as a finisher. Mystic Sanctuary also does a really good job of setting up Terminus. On your opponent's turn, say in their attack step, you can fetch a Mystic Sanctuary, put a Terminus on top, then cast an Opt, and boom, Terminus your opponent. I think that's really, really good. There's a chance we should be playing more Mystic Sanctuaries or more Floodplains. I'm still trying to figure that out. It's something I want to play with a little bit more, but I just think that's really strong. I think the slow fetches and Mystic Sanctuary are actually really interesting just in this format in general. The fact that you can combine a 2-color slow fetch with these Tango lands, is that what we're calling them? I don't know. But these are actually one of the better budget dual lands that we get, and having it be a typed land, a Plains Island, to be fetchable is really awesome. So I want to continue exploring what you can do with your mana base playing slow fetches and these lands. But I don't know, time will tell. We'll figure out the right numbers. So that's the mana base and the miracles. We'll talk about kind of the rest of the glue of this deck. And notably, this deck is pretty cheap. We're mostly playing our miracles and backing it up with cheap interaction, cheap mana value-wise. We get to play 4 Swords to Plowshares and 4 Counterspell. And if you look at the price, that's nearly $13 right there. And we're allowed to spend $13 on those cards because the rest of our cards are pretty cheap. Like, once you start looking for the next most expensive column here, it's like Terminus, the one Entreat, and that's it. Most everything else is pretty cheap. So, 1 Cling to Dust. I like this because it's a cantrip that you can use on your opponent's turn to make a miracle happen. I also think it's a good bit of mainboard graveyard hate because it's so versatile. It generates advantage in grindy midrange and control mirrors. It helps gain life when you need to stabilize, and it cantrips itself efficiently for 1 mana while also being graveyard hate. I just think this card's really strong. Notably, Nihil Spellbomb is creeping up in price. It's up to about 50 cents per copy now, which is why I'm playing Ravenous Trap in the sideboard. I'm not sure if that's right. I will say I'm starting to be a little bit lower on Ravenous Trap, and in this deck specifically, it would be really nice for Nihil Spellbomb to be able to cantrip into a miracle on our opponent's turn. So there's a chance I should restructure a little bit so that I get to play Nihil Spellbomb. And it's also nice that it can catch things more easily than Ravenous Trap, because Ravenous Trap is better against the all-in graveyard things like Reanimator, Cephalid Breakfast, and Dredge, really. But it does miss some incidental graveyard stuff, like, for example, Martyr Proc is actually a really big deal, because they operate on 4 copies of Abiding Grace. It's pretty often that they'll be rebuying their Martyr of Sands or whatever, and Ravenous Trap just isn't going to be live. Luckily, it is castable in this deck. We have a whopping 2 black sources, so it is possible, but it's something to think about. Going back to our interaction, Opts helps set up miracles. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about Portent. Portent also sets up miracles. You can Portent yourself, look at the top 3, and if there's a miracle in them, you can't put a card from your hand in, but if one of the top 3 cards is a miracle, you can set it up so that you draw it on your opponent's turn. So in that case, this delayed draw trigger is actually beneficial to us because it does let us set up a miracle on their turn. So Portent's pretty good. Swords, counterspells, lose focus just as additional counterspells. 1 Detention Sphere. My thought is that we see a lot of cards, and I want a catch-all. This was added, I think the day that I put this together. I didn't have a sideboard, and I played a game against Martyr Proc, and there were just so many Abiding Graces going that I literally couldn't. There's no way I was going to deal enough damage, even with Entreat the Angels, to outpace the Martyr Proc life gain. So I think having one Detention Sphere in the main board just to deal with problem permanents is pretty good. Right now I'm playing one Dig Through Time because we're cantripping a lot, and I want to be able to make use of my graveyard. There's a chance a Treasure Cruise should be in here as well, but I'm not sure. We do want to leave things in our graveyard for Mystic Sanctuary, and we do tend to operate at instant speed more, as well as the fact that a lot of the times when you're drawing cards like this, I think you're like looking for a specific thing, right? Either you've got Brainstones in play and you really want to find a miracle spell like a Sister Repentia or a Entreat the Angels, and Dig Through Time has better selection for that, or you're sitting on a lot of miracle spells and you want to be able to find a Brainstone or a Brainstorm to get the miracle out of your hand. So that's why I'm playing Dig over Cruise. I'm not sure that's correct, but that's kind of my logic for it. You can tell me if you think that's wrong. And then moving to the sideboard, Blossoming Calm. I believe in this card, truthfully. I think it's good against like aggressive things, Hymn to Turok based mid-range decks. I think it's good against Storm, potentially, like if they're trying to Grape Shot or Tendrils you out. Gaining Hexproof's a big deal. So I think this is a fine card, and I think it's just going to help us survive in the aggressive matchups until we can get to a Terminus. One additional Cling to Dust, same reasons as the first one. 4 Ravenous Traps for kind of the all-in graveyard style decks. 1 Shatter. I was finding myself kind of wanting the capacity to have an additional board wipe that doesn't take the setup that Terminus does and isn't necessarily as forecast or as conditional. So just 1 Shatter this guy. Notably, for anyone who's brewing a deck that wants to play board wipes, there is Shatter the Sky, which clocks in at 20 cents and is pretty good. There is also another card called Depopulate that's fairly new. We'll look at that really quick. It's a very similar card, 7 cents more expensive, but you get to draw a card if you have a multicolored creature. So I always like to think whether my white board wipe deck should be playing Depopulate or Shatter the Sky. In this case, I'm not sure it really matters a ton for us, because if we have a Sister Repentia in play, we're going to draw either way, for the Power Clause or for the Multicolored Clause. But it's worth thinking about if your local metagame has more multicolored creatures or 4-power creatures. Personally, I think that multicolored creatures are less common than 4-power creatures. So I guess I should really be playing a Depopulate instead of a Shatter the Sky. I do have the 7 cents to spare. So just think about that when you're building your decks. 3 Timely Reinforcements. I just want something to stabilize. I think most mid-range and control decks I can outgrind. I just don't want to die in the early turns to like a mono red blitz or something. Not super sure if my sideboard is exactly how it should be, but I think it's a good starting point. And I gotta say, I found this deck very enjoyable. I'm not typically much of a control player, so I definitely need to work on it. But I'm hoping to get some more practice in before I record some videos with this, because I think this deck's very powerful. Whether or not it's better than a traditional blue-white control or blue-black control with like True Name Nemesis, time will have to tell. But I think this is a powerful option, and I know that Miracles is kind of a fan favorite. I really enjoy it. It feels skill testing. It feels like your decisions matter, but you also have a lot of control over your draws and your sequencing, so I like that a lot. Let me pause this. There's a couple other cards I've considered. I thought maybe some Factor Fictions or maybe like Jace, Architect of Thought in the sideboard would be good. But that is starting to get a little bit more similar to like a traditional blue-white control list, so I didn't necessarily pull the trigger for this first run. I kind of want to see how the deck can stand on just being a really Miracles-dedicated list. But that's the list. I'm hoping to get it in some videos coming down the pipeline eventually, but it seems like that was a little while off, so I thought I would try this as a standalone video. Let me know what you guys think about the format. Do you like seeing deck techs as their own thing? I think it's going to be kind of cool because there's a lot of stuff that I want to share, And honestly, these are pretty quick to make. I think I'm just going to do one take and not much editing. So there you go. Let me know what you guys think of Miracles. Let me know if you would make any changes, or this is going to sound crazy, if you wouldn't play Brainstone. I've got a friend who insists Brainstone is just too bad and you should be relying on Portent and Brainstorm to get the job done, which is an interesting take. It might be correct. I don't know. Like I said, Brainstone is kind of inefficient. So if you have any thoughts on this, let me know. I'd love to hear what your take on Miracles and $30 budget vintage would be. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next deck. All right?